Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone did well on their vertebrate quiz. And as you can tell from the word staring you in the face in your lecture guide, today we're starting hormones or the endocrine system. Now, until about 5 years ago, this whole unit in Bio 152 was nothing but all the systems of the human, nervous, endocrine, digestive, etc. Except the curriculum was reordered a few years ago, and now this Unit 3 focuses on the animal kingdom. However, we decided to still do a couple representative systems just because they're so important to animals and because a lot of you have an interest in them. And hormones are important because they are very important in an animal's growth and development, and they are also very important for animals' ability to reproduce sexually. And as you know, animals pretty much reproduce sexually, the whole animal kingdom. And an interesting thing about hormones in the animal kingdom, you can find hormones, for instance, in the plant kingdom to help with growth, but in the animal kingdoms, as you will see, the hormonal system is very, very integrated with our nervous system. And you should also remember by now that nervous tissue, the nervous system, is a unique feature of the animal kingdom. So we begin. We're going to first begin with the definition of the word hormone. Now, I'm not really big on definitions, but every part of this is important. So a hormone is a chemical produced by an endocrine gland, released into the bloodstream that affects a particular target tissue. It'll break this down into all three parts. All right, first of all, and I would just go ahead and memorize this. Very few definitions I ask you to memorize. So it's a chemical produced by an endocrine gland. That's straightforward enough. Released into the bloodstream. So this is important. This is how it travels throughout the animal's body. It circulates throughout the blood. Your book makes a big deal of saying that, well, it technically secretes the hormone into the interstitial fluids right outside the blood, and then it diffuses into the blood. Other biology books say, hey, secretes it into the bloodstream. I won't quibble about that. And the other important thing, that hormones always affect a particular target tissue. So, for instance, if you were a male, when you hit puberty, the sex hormone testosterone affected a lot of cells of your body. For instance, you got facial hair, your muscles growth. But other parts of your body didn't really change that much. Your nose, for instance. Why does a hormone affect certain tissues rather than others? Well, the important thing is a target tissue has to have receptors for that hormone. All right, so we're going to look at characteristics of hormones. Okay, one striking characteristic of hormones to me is that they are secreted in very minute quantities, very, very minute. A little goes a long way. So take a second, and this is a decimal, convert it into your mind into a fraction. You're a science major, what does this represent? What fraction of a gram is this? Not a millionth, no. I count 6 zeros. This represents 1/10,000,000th. So typically hormones are secreted at this level, 1/10,000,000th of a gram. That's very small. You want to be very careful if you have to take artificial hormones for any reason, because you just don't want too much of a hormone. All right, they are secreted in response to a specific stimulus. Okay, so hormones are always secreted in response to a specific stimulus. And as mentioned before, hormones affect a very specific target tissue. And as I've already mentioned, for a cell to respond to a hormone, it has to have receptors for that hormone. This is pretty typical in biology. The stronger the stimulus, the greater the response. So if you're listening and I just say, boo, all right, that might not surprise you very much. You might not jump out of your seat, but if I give a really loud boo, all right, that might cause you to jump and your heart to start beating. So again, the greater the stimulus, the greater the response. That's typical in biology, and with the endocrine system, the more a gland is secreted, the more a gland is stimulated, the more hormone it will secrete. Another characteristic of hormones is the liver is always inactivating hormones. if, let's say, you were listening to this lecture and suddenly, I don't know where you are, in a bus, in your bedroom, on a beach, and suddenly a grizzly bear came into the same room as you, you might be very frightened, I would think. What hormone do you think would be secreted? Maybe adrenaline. The adrenaline would get your heart to pump fast so you could get more oxygen to your cells so you could run away very fast. Well, all right, maybe it was a mistake. The bear meant to go bug somebody else, so he moves away. And 2 hours after you see this bear, you don't need to have a racing heart. Well, that's just how it always is in your body. After the stimulus has gone away, you don't need that hormone to be secreted anymore, and the liver is always inactivating the hormone. So let's have a practical implication to this. Whoa, I did it again. I hit end of lecture. All right, here's our practical implication. We're going to have a Dr. House moment. Do you guys remember the TV show House? In case you forgot, this is what he looks like. All right, he has a question for you. One of his patients have too much of a hormone, hormone X, in her bloodstream. What are the 2 possible causes? Why don't you think about this a moment and write this down in your lecture guide. What do you think are the 2 possible causes? Could play Jeopardy music here. All right, one possible cause is the endocrine gland is over-secreting the hormone. So you could have an overproduction of a hormone. We don't know which hormone, we don't know which gland because we haven't specified yet. But another answer I bet you came up with is that there could be a decreased rate of inactivation. So as we go through the hormone system, I'll try to have you think about these in a systemic way. It's better than just memorizing them. We want to understand how they affect the body and the relationship. All right, here's a quick and dirty tour of the endocrine system. The master gland is the pituitary gland. It's right here. If you wish to locate your own pituitary gland, what you need are 2 arrows. If you stick one right between your eyes and the other into your ear, where they intersect will be the pituitary gland. All right, maybe that's not a good thing to try at home, but that is the position of the pituitary gland. It's just underneath the brain. And it is known as the master gland. The thyroid gland is the master gland of your body. It has this characteristic butterfly shape, and it's wrapped around your windpipe, which is called, do you know? It's called the trachea. Remember, trachea means tube, just like the tracheophytes of plants have tubes. All right, embedded in your thyroid gland is your parathyroid glands. Now, these aren't listed on your lecture guide, but what might surprise you are some of these organs: heart, liver, stomach, kidney, small intestine. They aren't endocrine glands per se. However, they contain endocrine cells, and when they get the proper stimulus, these organs, certain cells in these organs, will release hormones. All right, let's continue our little tour here. The adrenal glands. Renal, most of you may know, means kidney. So the adrenal glands are on top of your kidneys. Now the adrenal glands are actually 2 glands. So we'll try to do a little sketch of this. All right, so this represents an adrenal gland. It says poor drawing of adrenal gland. Here you can see one right here, sitting on top of your kidneys. You have one there, and you have another one over here. Now if we did a cutaway view, the inside part of your adrenal gland is called the adrenal medulla. And medulla in general in biology just means interior part. I mean, you have a part of your brain that's interior here. That's called the medulla. So this is your adrenal medulla. Just put an M for medulla. And the outside area is the adrenal cortex. And again, in biology, cortex just means outer area. So the outer part of your brain is the cerebral cortex. So your adrenal glands are actually 2 different endocrine glands. So you have 2 adrenal glands, and each adrenal gland is 2 endocrine glands, the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex. And actually we'll see in a moment that your pituitary gland is actually 2 glands. The pancreas is an important endocrine gland. Can you name an important hormone made by the pancreas? You're probably thinking insulin, which is correct. Another one is glucagon. Now, in a previous incarnation of this course, I used to talk a lot about the pancreas and diabetes, which might be very important to you. So on this lecture guide, I have a bunch of questions in green. Those are totally optional. So if you're just really interested in learning more about the pancreas and diabetes, please read them. It is not required though. And maybe I'll have some extra credit questions on your next Open Study Guide quiz, but it's mainly for your benefit. All right, the ovaries and testes, the gonads, are also endocrine glands. So this is your quick and dirty tour of the endocrine system. Page down, I got it right this time. Types of hormones. In general, you can characterize them as water-soluble and lipid-soluble. But I'm going to go over the 4 major types of molecules, which I believe are located on your lecture guide. So basically, proteins and variations of proteins can serve as hormones. And in general, proteins are water-soluble. All right, now, one group of hormones are called the amines. And what your body does is take an amino acid and modifies it, and it turns it into an amine hormone. Now, if you took Bio 151, maybe you remember page 79. Page 79 lists all 20 amino acids, and it shows whether they're hydrophilic or hydrophobic, or if they're charged. So, if an amine hormone was derived from a hydrophilic amino acid, well then this hormone would be water soluble. An example of that is epinephrine. On the other hand, thyroxine is derived from a hydrophobic amino acid, and it is hydrophobic. Perhaps you know an epinephrine by another name. Have you heard of this before? Another name for epinephrine is adrenaline, and adrenaline is produced by the adrenal medulla. So again, it makes sense. Adrenaline, you just add I-N-E to the end of this word. That's adrenaline, and adrenaline is produced by the adrenal medulla. So if you're ever watching a TV show and the doctor or the nurse or the health worker says, give me 5 cc's of adrenaline, I'm sorry, what they usually say is, give me 5 cc's of epinephrine, stat. All right, 5 cc's, that's 5 cubic centimeters or 5 milliliters, which actually seems like a large amount to me. But anyway, 5 cc's of epinephrine, stat, right away, that means give me 5 cc's of adrenaline. All right, steroid hormones. This is something you're not allowed to forget from Bio 151, even if you never had it. No matter who was your professor, you should know that your body takes a certain molecules and modifies it and makes a steroid hormone. Do you remember the name of that biological molecule that I call the steroid mama? What does your body make all steroids out of it? It begins with a C. Rhymes with cholesterol. Yeah. Cholesterol, all right? I call cholesterol the steroid mama because what your body does whenever it wants to make a steroid hormone, it takes cholesterol, which has this 4-ring shape, and modify it to make the steroid hormones. Hopefully you remember cholesterol is a lipid, so all the steroid hormones are lipid soluble because they are derived from cholesterol. All right. I'm not going to talk about signal transduction pathway right now, but I do want you to notice the structure of thyroxine. All right, if you look over to your right, thyroxine has an atom in there that you don't typically find in most biological molecules. Can you identify what that atom is? Are you thinking iodine? If so, you are correct. So here's thyroxine, and notice it has 4 atoms of iodine. Another way to say this is you need 4 atoms of iodine to make 1 molecule of thyroxine. So if you've ever had your thyroid levels tested and they're testing for thyroxine, what you'll see on your medical report are T4 levels. This is how the medical profession refers to thyroxine as T4. And this is why, because it has 4 atoms of iodine. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the pituitary, which, as I already told you, is the master gland. I have already told you how to locate the pituitary, right? If you took a line directly from between your eyes and directly from where your ear is, there's the pituitary. It's located right under your brain. I've also told you already that it's really 2 lobes, an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. So it's really 2 different endocrine glands. Now this person is looking this way. So is this person's anterior side or posterior side? Hopefully you're thinking this is the person's anterior side, and the side that you see when someone's walking away, that's their posterior side. So this right here would be the anterior pituitary, and this is also, we'll blow this up in the next slide, and this is the posterior pituitary right here. All right, the reason why the pituitary is called the master gland because it releases hormones which controls other endocrine glands. So that's why it is called the master gland. So it did not really take scientists that long to figure out that the pituitary releases lots and lots of hormones that not only controls different functions of the body, but controls other glands. But they were shocked when they found out this, that the master gland itself has a master. And the master of the master gland is the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is part of your brain. So this is what I talked about before, that the nervous system of a vertebrate animal is tightly intertwined, interconnected, integrated with the endocrine system. This shocked scientists. I'm not quite sure what. Well, they just thought the nervous system and the endocrine system were two different systems. But in fact, your brain does control your hormone outputs, which again makes sense, right? You see that bear over there? That would be good sensory input to get some good hormones, good fight or flight hormones rolling around. All right. Now we're going to look at the pituitary glands more closely. Again, this person's still looking this way, which is not always the case. And so right here we have the anterior pituitary, and this is the posterior pituitary. So let's talk about how the hypothalamus controls the pituitary. All right, now what I'm going to try to draw are blood vessels in your brain, in your hypothalamus, and hopefully this is not shocking to you that you have blood that flows through your brain. Your brain needs oxygen, and that reaches it through the blood and blood vessels. Your brain needs glucose. So what I am attempting to draw here is a set of tiny little capillaries. They don't look that tiny, but you'll give me a little artistic license here. So there are some blood vessels, some capillaries that run directly from the hypothalamus. So this orange area here represents the hypothalamus. These capillaries run directly from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. So what the hypothalamus does, it makes its own hormones, and some of these hormones are called releasing hormones, sometimes called releasing factors because they're little short polypeptides. So these releasing hormones, again, they flow directly from the brain into the anterior pituitary. They diffuse out of the capillaries here, and then they stimulate the anterior pituitary to release its own hormones. So if I had a different color right now, I would use it, and these represent hormones in the anterior pituitary. And so these releasing hormones diffuse out, and they stimulate the anterior pituitary to release its hormones into the bloodstream. So that's how the hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary. It releases these short little hormones called releasing hormones into these capillaries, which directly carry the releasing hormones to the anterior pituitary. All right, now this is sort of crazy. Your posterior pituitary is really an extension of your brain. Now maybe you learned in another biology class that a nerve cell is also called a neuron. And it's a funky looking cell which have these extensions from it. So again, if I were to draw a neuron over here we have a nerve cell, we're eukaryotes, we have a nucleus, we have these projections. Maybe this is a terrible picture called dendrites. I did not mean to do that line. And then a very, very long extension called an axon. All right, well, these neurons here, so this is a neuron here, here's another neuron. These are neurons. They're part of the hypothalamus, part of your brain. And their cell bodies are in your brain, but the axons extend into the posterior pituitary. And these are called neurosecretory cells because they actually make hormones that travel along the axon and then they're released. So we have hormones that are made in these neurons, in these neurosecretory cells. They travel, if you can imagine these little globules of hormone, they travel down. And what I'm trying to say is the posterior pituitary hormones, they're really hypothalamic hormones. They're made in the hypothalamus and they are just stored in the posterior pituitary, and then they're released at the appropriate moment. So this gives you an idea of how the anterior pituitary is different from the posterior pituitary and how the hypothalamus communicates with both of these differently. Now, this is a very important concept, and I gave you an ugly drawing. So what I'm going to do is pause here, and I want you to work through a short animation and take a couple of notes on it that illustrates this in better detail and elaborates on it. And you should take, at the very end of this animation, it says click on these hormone pairs, and I want you to click on the top two and take notes on them. I'll see you in the next unit.